So the cost of taking real estate in Ukraine has gone up pretty significantly for the Russians in recent months. And I'm going to show you that in just a little bit. Hello, my friends. It is Wednesday, April 2nd, 2025. My name is Gerdes. I'm just a professor trying to provide context in the war in Ukraine. Here we go. It's 1,410 Russians off the battlefield today, day over day, 10 tanks, 24 armored vehicles, 24 artillery systems, 41 vehicles and fuel tanks. When we look at the number of Shahed drones launched, remember, no Shahed were launched last night. Now, I'm not sure exactly what happened. Were they out of them? Were they amassing more for a rainy day? I was expecting a larger barrage today just because there was none yesterday. And maybe that's still to come, but I just don't know. Russia launched 74 Shahed drones, of which 41 were shot down. Another 20 were either lost in location or suppressed. So that's 61 out of 74. So they did some damage. Russian shelling in Kherson left 45,000 without power, halts electric transport services. One person was killed, 9 wounded as Russian forces targeted dozens of settlements across Kherson Oblast over the past day. U.S. ambassador was saying that Russia launched a record number of drones against Ukraine in March 2025. Over 4,000 drones were used, the highest monthly total since February of 2022. So last month was the highest number of drones launched against Ukraine throughout the war. Now, there was also a record for destroying Russian drones as well. Ukrainian defenders shot down 4,060 UAVs just in March. So, okay, there's that. 3 weeks after Russia totally ignored calls for a ceasefire, Russians continue to escalate attacks on Ukraine's civilian population. The strikes last night involved over 70 drones. Again, 61 of those were either shot down or suppressed, which led to some damage like, well, this. Russia launched another massive drone attack last night in Kharkiv. One resident told Radio Svoboda that waves of Shahed drones were coming every minute. That has to be disconcerting. Russian officials, on the other hand, this is what Ukraine is doing to Russia. Russian officials report that 93 drones were intercepted overnight. Russian authorities declared a state of emergency in Taganrog, following a wave of drone attacks that caused fires in residential buildings. Now, the name Taganrog rang a bell, but I couldn't remember exactly where it was. I'll show you on the map in just a moment. Drones attacked Taganrog, Russia. There were reports of fire in a residential building from drone debris. I don't know what they were targeting there exactly, but drone debris apparently was becoming problematic. Sparks were visible at one of the explosion sites, power lines likely damaged. Taganrog is over here, not too far from Mariupol. My guess is it was on its way to Rostov-on-Don. I don't know that for sure, but that's what I would assume given its proximity to Rostov. Taganrog and Rostov is over here. Video appeared in Russian Telegram channels that reportedly showed the aftermath on a strike on a Russian airfield located in the village of Ivnia. Okay, so now this was a pretty good strike for the Ukrainians. Reportedly, the strike was carried out using HIMARS M30A2 missiles with tungsten balls. The result of the strike was 4 helicopters of the Russian armed forces, 2 Ka and 2 Mi-8, were critically damaged. And you can see the pockmarks in the sides of the helicopters here in just a moment. Let me go back over here. And let's just see this. Yeah, look at that. That's chopped up. So these helicopters will at least require lots of repair if they're not irreparably damaged. So that was a good hit for the Ukrainians. Let's turn our attention to the battlefield and what's going on there. In the Pokrovsk direction, Russian invaders conducted 45 assaults. Again, we use Pokrovsk because that's what Russia wants most as kind of a bellwether for how hard the intensity or how strong the intensity is. Russian forces are consolidating Ukrainian forces are consolidating their positions in the Belgorod region in the Russian Federation. And so, again, that Belgorod incursion is not huge, but it's something. It's not nothing, and it's going to tie Russian troops up that have to contend with it. And again, I think the Russians who want to attack into Sumy are going to have an extra headache because of that. Russian forces attempted to destroy a dam near Popovka in the Belgorod region using an FAB 3000 bomb, but it failed. So they tried to destroy their own dam. I think the idea was to flood, like they missed it or something. They like hit next to it. I think here is where the dam is, and they hit here, and so I think the idea was to flood the region in order to cut off the Ukrainians from being able to make extra ground or something along those lines, and they missed. So okay, they blew up some dirt, it looks like. Ukraine's recent incursion into the Belgorod region east of Sumy has led to a windfall for Russian traffic police. Calling them werewolves in uniform, Russian war bloggers accuse them of systematically robbing Russian troops responding to the Ukrainian offensive. So if you understand this correctly, when Ukrainians came into Kursk, they treated the Russian civilians pretty well. When the Russians came into the Kursk region, they treated the civilians terribly and were robbing their houses and things along those lines. And the Russian cops robbed the Russian troops that came to respond to Ukrainian troops. So that's what's going on there. It's pretty remarkable to watch. Russian forces are expanding the bridgehead northeast of Liman as part of a mutually reinforcing effort to create conditions for the seizure of Borova and Liman in the coming months. A big fight is coming. I mean, a big fight. We're going to have a 3 to 6 month offensive here shortly. Putin just yesterday announced a 160,000 more mobilization. There's an annual thing with mobilization, but another 160,000. That's the highest in 14 years. It's coming, and the fight is coming. When the ground dries out, give it about a month, and there's going to be a big renewed offensive. It's on its way. Okay, now what's the cost of the offensive? So this chart was really informative. The price of a square kilometer in the Korytsa Operational Strategic Group. I don't know if I pronounced Korytsa Operational Strategic Group. Okay, so what you see is enemy assaults in the red, and you see it's high in November, it's higher in December, a little bit lower in January, much lower in February, a little higher in March. But then how many square kilometers were lost to the Russians as a consequence? And you see it's higher in November and December, and in January it's lower and lower in February and lower in March. And so that shows you the cost of soldiers as opposed to the real estate, and how much more costly it was here in March when they didn't take much real estate but lost a lot of soldiers, almost as many as in January. And yeah, so let's just look at this. The graph shows the price of Russian advancement in Ukraine in recent months. In November of 2024, it took Russians 7.1 attacks on average to advance one square kilometer. In December and January, this number grew to 15.9 and 15.7 respectively. In February, it took Russians 17.1 attacks to capture 1 square kilometer of Ukrainian land. In March, the number rose to 36.4 attacks per square kilometer. The numbers are given for this Korytsa Operational Strategic Group, and it has Kharkiv and Luhansk and Donetsk regions and in a zone of responsibility. So most of the northeast section. Okay, so it's actually costing many more attacks, many more lives per square kilometer, and it's just going up, and it's going to continue to go up. And as drones become more pervasive, drones are now to Ukraine what IEDs were to Afghanistan and Iraq. And what was happening there was that more soldiers died died or were wounded from IEDs than from any other means in Afghanistan and Iraq. Same thing with drones. Drones are now becoming that same thing, and drones are just becoming more and more pervasive on the battlefield. A KMIS study or poll shows that 73% of Ukrainians think that Trump is bad for their country. This is a decrease in threefold. So it's changed significantly over time. I've been tracking this as well. There was some optimism at the very beginning of Trump's term, and that has largely dissipated. I do a poll every week saying, okay, Trump will be good for Ukraine or Trump will be good for Russia, or I can't predict. And now it's 85-4. Trump will be good for Russia over Ukraine, with 12% saying that they can't predict. But again, I do a week over week so that we can kind of track where it's going, and it stayed pretty low recently. Okay, Russian political scientist Mikhail Pavlov, who left Ukraine and moved to Russia. Quote, information wars are yesterday's day. According to NATO doctrine, cyber warfare and information theater of warfare was added in 2016. In 2022, at the Madrid summit, they added the so-called human doming to the theater of war. It's cognitive warfare. It's sentiment. We will not be able to propagandize the Ukrainian average person to love Russia head on right now. It won't work, friends. Well, there's a reason for that when you're killing their friends and relatives that they aren't going to love Russia. But the cognitive warfare field is sentiment, causing them to think about you one way or another. Okay, just for because I'm very interested in this, I like to show kamikaze drones being intercepted by FPV drones and knocked down in the air, and there's that. And then I saw this, and I thought, wow, this is a new wave. This is where we're going in the future. China greenlights autonomous passenger drones. Nothing to do with the war itself, but just to see where drones are going. Commercial flights coming soon. Chinese firms, Ehang Holdings and Hefei Airlines, have received final regulatory approvals to operate autonomous passenger drones. So we have autonomous cars. They're going to have autonomous like helicopters that are basically drones that carry you to and from wherever you need to go, marking a major step toward drone-based urban air mobility in China. That's wow. Okay. Back to where we are in the war. Kadyrov appoints his 17-year-old son as curator of Chechnya's interior ministry. He immediately hands out medals and appoints officials. Adam Kadyrov led an interior ministry meeting, assigned his own security chief, awarded medals. Chechnya's security forces are now under a teenager with zero experience. This guy has a raft of medals at 17 just because he's the son of the guy in charge, and he's setting them up for success. But if I were rooting against you, I would say this is terrific. This is exactly what you want to do. You want to put incompetent, nepotistic appointees in charge, and then you'll have a very low-level base of managerial excellence. Okay, 3 years, last couple things. 3 years since Kyiv region was retaken from Russian forces. 3 years ago, Ukrainian forces regained control of the Kyiv region, stopping Russia's early push toward the capital during the initial stage of the full-scale invasion. Now, the Russians will tell it as they were just being kind. They were negotiating, and then they withdrew but then they were backstabbed. No, they were pushed out. The withdrawal of Russian troops uncovered widespread destruction and reports of civilian deaths, disappearance, and looting, drawing international condemnation. Now, I think, and a German professor told me this, he said, just like in the East Germany and West Germany scenario, you found out things that you wouldn't have found out before when it was closed. One of the reasons that Putin doesn't want to lose those 4 oblasts is because you'll find all kinds of evidence of bad things being done to the population within Ukraine. And I'm afraid that he might be right. This is Defense of Ukraine talking about the same thing. 3 years ago, the defense forces drove the enemy out of the Kyiv region. The Russians attempted to swiftly capture the capital, but shattered their ambitions against the resilience of the Ukrainian soldiers and the unity of Ukrainian society. At the same time, with the liberation of the Kyiv region, the world witnessed the true face of the Russian world: execution of civilians, kidnappings, and tea. The victory in the Battle of Kyiv sent a clear message: Ukraine can and will fight, and our warriors prove this every day. Glory to the Ukrainian heroes. All right. So that's it. I just have one more visual for you. This is Darth Putin. This is the Motherland calls the monument restoration. The Motherland calls. It's a monument restoration in Volgograd in Russia, 2019. They were re-imaging it, and they had all the scaffolding around it. And Darth Putin just quips, are we sure this wasn't just afraid of Ukrainian drones? Okay, my friends, that's all that I have. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes and the shares and the subscribes. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.